Learning about Black Gemara. Today's daf is daf Lamed Gimel, and the discussion we are in the middle of is whether Bia b'mikdash shma Bia or not. So if you made a partial entry into the base of Mikdash while you were Tameh, is that called Bia, as you enter the base of Mikdash and you've committed a sin, and Chayiv Koros and all that? Or do we say that Bia b'mikdash is just placing your hands inside the Loish Bia? So we had Ula in the name of Resh Lakish, that Bia b'miktzas shma Bia. So we're on top of the page, and we're going to continue exploring Resh Lakish's view, and then, in fact, we'll have an argument. Resh Lakish even never said it. Says the Gemara here, 2 lines on the top of the page. Lema, let us say, Misayele, let's bring a proof to support Resh Lakish. It says there, Kol hasmiches shahaya sham. That, remember, we learned before that you have to, prior to the shechting of a korban, you have to place your hand, b'chol koicha, with all your energy, and take it l'smicha shchita. And immediately following the smicha, you have to go ahead and you have to shecht it. And in fact, according to Rashi, that's how we know that it has to be done by someone that is pure, because the shchita is done inside the Beis HaMikdash, lifnei Hashem. So the smicha, which has to be done immediately before it, also has to be done inside the Azara, in the courtyard, so therefore must be somebody who's Torah. The Shechit itself could be, you can argue that you can be standing outside with a very long knife, which in itself is very questionable. How in the world can you have a knife that's 135 amas long? Rabbeinu Tam actually says that is talking about that you became Tameh while you were standing inside the Beis HaMikdash. If you become Tameh while you're standing inside the Beis HaMikdash, then you can remain there. It's only that if you're outside, you shouldn't walk in. But anyway, so, Kol hasmicha shahaya sham, all those smichas that were there, koiri alein, I say, tekif l'smicha shchita. You need the smicha and the shchita should be right next to each other. Chutz mezu, the only exception is by Mitzorah. Because the Mitzorah is Tameh, and in order to complete his, in a way, his redemption, to remove that Tumah is that he has to go to the Shan Nikanor. You go on the eastern side, you walk up. The Shan Nikanor was a 10 amas wide entrance, and they deliberately did not make it Kodesh, so the Mitzorah can stand there, and then the Kohen who's on the other side has to sprinkle some of the blood of the korban asham on your right thumb and toe, and also the oil has to go on your earlobe and your right toe and your right thumb. So this is the only exception. The Mitzorah cannot go beyond that point. First have to sprinkle on him. It doesn't mean the dam chatas actually sprinkled on the mizbeach, but it means after they sprinkle the blood of the chatas on the mizbeach, then they take the blood of the osham. Only the blood of the osham goes on his toe and on his right thumb, not the blood of the korban chatas. And nevertheless, so he cannot really go in because he's tummy until that process takes place. So therefore, that's the only time when we say that we cannot have tekiv smicha l'shchita. There's a pause in between. Now the question is why? There is a resolution. Because I'm going to be a mixus from me. If you can tell me that Bia mixus is if you can disagree with the shlok, you just say that if he just puts his hands inside, it's not a problem. So why can't you have the animal standing on the other side of the entrance and let the Mitzorah stand inside Shar Nikanor and just place his hands on the animal, and he's tamei, but Bia makes his loish mabia, so it's not an issue. And then you'll have take a smich l'shchita, la'il yodev lismech. So why? that supports the Shlokish's view, which the Shlokish's view is that Bia b'miktzas is shma Bia. Even just placing his hands inside is as if he went to the base of English, and therefore we have no choice. Omar Rabbi Yisrael said no support. You know why? Because you're assuming that we can bring. You're assuming that the animal can be brought all the way to the Shah Nikanor and do the shchita there. But remember, we had 3 opinions. We had one opinion, the korban asham, korban chatzah has to be done on the north side. We had one opinion of the north. So you're assuming, like Rebbe, that the entire courtyard, including the Ezra's Kohanim, the Ezra Yisrael, which each is 11 amas, you can shech the korban. So you're asking me a question, bring the animal all the way to Shah Nikanor. But if you follow the 2 other views, which the majority hold the north side of the Mizbeach is where you can shech, or from the north side of the Mizbeach, which is the right side, including also the section between the Mizbeach and the Beis HaMikdash. So it's not taken. What do you gain? You still have 22 amas to walk. From there, you still have 22 amas to walk from there all the way to the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, this is the famous Ramah, who paskins, the Ramah who paskins that takeif when it says right after you wash your hands, you have to make hamotzi. And how much time should the pause be? So the Ramah says 22 amas. And the basis for that is Taisus says from this Gemara right here, because we're talking about Teikis Michel Shchita, and we're saying we have a problem because you follow the view that says it's on the north side of Zbech, on the right side of Zbech. If you do that, there's 11 amas of Ezes Yisrael, 11 amas of Ezes Kainim, and therefore it's no longer Teikif. So we see that the Teikif is 22 amas. However, Chacham Tzvi, Magen Avraham,
Is it because the left and take it? It says
I don't know, it's halacha. We're saying here, we have a problem. We're saying the only time that we suspend the laws of Teikif Smichel Shchita is by Mitzvah. That's the only time we suspend it. Why is it suspension? Because it's too far away. How far away was it? 22 amas.
in the correlation to washing.
Because let's take it until yeah. They all ask because there are other views here, and this is only one view, and the other views is from the beginning of the Gemara. It seems, the beginning of the Gemara, it seems that if you follow Rebbe, then even though it's standing on the outside, what do we say? Rebbe holds the animals right outside the gate, the Sharnikaner, and yet the Gemara is saying, why you have a problem taking a stick your hands out. What do you stick your hands out? And if your hands are in, it's only 1 foot away from to bring the animal 1 foot. Is that I from here that even 1 foot, 1 step is already considered take a smichel shchita. So anyway, so that's the question. Chacham Tzvi, Magen Avraham, they will ask, have different answers. Okay, so we're talking now about the Shlokish who says that he holds that bia b'mikzah shma bia. Just putting your hands in, you're already chayv kares, as if you're in the base of English. We want to bring a proof from it. The base says no proof because he said that has to be mamash on the other side, and therefore it's way too far. That's why you have no, stick your hands. You're not going to get there. It's 22 amas away. Fedi might have allowed pish, they go through the side. Okay, you don't go through the Ezes Nashim and everything else. Go through the side, make a hole all the way in the north side, on the right side of the Mizbech, make a hole in the wall, and stick your hands in there. If you hold a biba mixes loishma bia, there's a resolution here. Why suspend a din in a tater that's take your smichel shchita? There's a way out. Is a bayir of them. They both say we learned it a few number of times already that it's in the pasuk hakoil b'ksav meyad Hashem alai hiskil, that we learned from there that every single aspect of the base of Mikdash has to follow exactly the way it was relayed by the Nevi'im. Kol melech tabnis, and therefore you can't go make holes in the wall of the base of Mikdash. Okay. That's one version. Ikinami, others say, Rabbi Yosef says, the problem is, another answer. The problem is, he says, another answer is version of Rabbi Yosef. If you want to have really strength, you can't just put your hands there. How much koyach do you have in your hands? He said, if you want to have koyach, smicha, we had in Chagiga, the first big machlek, that's not smicha. So you have to walk in, and basically you have to put your body weight and everything else on it. So it's not going to help putting your hands out. You have to go in, and therefore you have a problem. And that's why we suspend the rule by mitzvah. The machlekes here is when it says kol koiche, that you can at the time, or kol koiche means literally kol koiche. If kol koiche means literally kol koiche, then you have to reish rubei. But the way we learned before, you don't need reish rubei, just your hands, because as far as your hands are concerned, that's kol koiche of your hands, and that's good enough. That's the argument. Might have a kol koiche being hichel loy efshe. Says the Gemara, let's analyze it further. Mike, so what do you hold? If you hold smichas oshem, remember there's 2 dinim here. You have to have smicha, and then you have to have take of smicha l'shchita. And before we learned out the way Rashi learned, but we learned out that smicha has to be done with tahirim. How do we know that? Because since take of l'smicha shchita has to be right next to each other, and the shchita it says lifnei Hashem, so obviously the smicha also has to be lifnei Hashem, and therefore by smicha you have to have somebody who is Torah. How can it be lifnei Hashem not Torah? What about shchita? Because shchita you can have a long knife. You can be standing outside, even though I told you that Rabbi Tam asks, it's 135 amas long. It's impossible. So Rabbi Tam makes his chiddush, but if you're already in the Zorah, then you become Tam and you're allowed to remain there, or other answers. Okay. Then you want further. So what do you hold? There's 2 dinim, right? One is that you need smicha, and one that you need take your smicha l'shchita. Now we know you need smicha; it says very clearly. But what about the carbon of a mitzvah, which is different than all other kabbanas? It's not a kapara. It's there to enable him to eat kachim, to remove the tzaras. Who said you need smicha there? So, what do you hold? Ikasov smicha doshim mitzvah that I hold the hatoida. The take give the smicha that I both hatoida. No, just like we allow the mitzvah to stand in the shan nikoner and stick his thumbs in and to get his thing. The Torah says you can do that. The Torah allows. No, the Torah demands smicha to walk inside. I have a problem, but Torah says clearly this is what you should do. So what's the shaila? The Torah is leil v'lismach lehedya. The Torah says you should do it. What's the shaila? Navas. One of them must be the rabbanon, and therefore, in this case, we can't allow that because you're tummy. So which one is? You know what? Gzeida shemeyarbe bepsias. This is no Mahatayda. The Taka can say it's mitzvah Mahatayda, but the rabbanon then said. But it actually learns. Once you finished, you did what you had to do. What happens is you fazam a little bit, you hang around a little bit, you delay, you're tardy, and you take another step. That step, you're already a chayiv kodesh for walking. You have no excuse.
Stop doing something that the Torah says to do.
So this is a famous taz that everybody asks on the taz. There's a famous shit of taz in Hilchot Rosh Hashanah, in Yerdei Kuf Yud Zayin, where the taz makes a rule that that if the Torah clearly. Taz has a very interesting question. Why is it Rosh Hashanah, Shefer, on Shabbos, falls on Shabbos, but no Shefer? Why Gzeira She'am Hivren? So why don't you make the same din by a bris? We should not allow a bris meal on Shabbos. Gzeira She'am Hivren. What's the difference? So the general answer given is because since no one else has that excitement of the mitzvah, they're going to remind the moil don't carry. It's only by Shefer everyone is involved in the mitzvah, so we all want to do it. So we'll forget ourselves. But Taz is mechadish. Since the Torah says clearly, "Vayom Hashmin and Yimov Sar Lasem," we learn from there after the Shabbos, and that the Chachamim do not have the right to come and ask us something with the Torah klor matter. So there's a number of questions on the Taz, and this is one of the questions right here. Where's it? As you just asked, the Torah says clearly, and yet there is matter. Economic, other say. Who said both the Raisa? Smichas Oshem Mitzvah is the Raisa, yeah. The smich of an Oshem Mitzvah, like any other carbon, b'samach, so you have to have smich. Oh, but this din of takev, the smich, shchita, maybe it's on the Rabban. Where does it say in the Torah you have to have takev? So even though it says b'samach v'shachat, and we said before takev, maybe this the whole something with the Rabban. Meisri, I'll ask you a question. And that's why we don't allow the Mitzvah to go in, because this whole din is on the Rabbanon. What the Rabbanon's din of having right next to it is going to push away. You can't do that. Makes a question. It says v'samach v'shachat. It says that v'samach he should place, and we just had this yesterday. V'samach, two versions. What are we learning from what? But one pasuk says v'samach, and the next pasuk says v'shachat. So we compare the two. Ma smicha b'tahirin, just like smicha has to be done by tahirin. How do we know taka? So the way Rashi learned is because the din of take a smicha l'shchita. And where does the shchita have to be? Lifnei Hashem. So where does the smicha have to be? Lifnei Hashem. So we see Matayda. Is abshchita b'tayda. So we see close means Matayda. V'yamrit lav d'oraisa. If you tell me that what? At the whole din of take of smicha l'shchita is not Matayda, that means Matayda you can do the smicha outside. No. So how do you know it has to be taydin? You can do it outside and be tummy. A live animal doesn't become tummy. Is betmei namim v'kachizla. Ella eifach. I'll turn it all the way around. You're right. Take of smicha l'shchita is mahatayda, but smichas oshem mitzayda is the rabbanon, and therefore we can't just allow the mitzayda to walk inside, and do his smicha, because it's only with the rabbanon to have smichas oshem. Why is that with the rabbanon? This is different than all other kabbanas. It's not. It's like more a matter than a mechaper. But take if the smicha is the raisa, and because the smicha is not the raisa, we can't allow the mitzayda just to walk in. That's one answer. Ravina comes along and gives an answer. Le'inyan Malkus Itmar. This was Ula said before in the name of Reish Lakish that Bia b'miktzas is Shema Bia as if you walk in the Mikdash. Now, if you remember, we learned about 3 machnas. But if you walk into the machnas Shechina, a Tameh, Yechayiv Kodesh, that's only if you walk in. Reish Lakish is Chiddush that even just putting your hands in, that's as far as the lav is concerned. Because you learn from Chol Kodesh Loisiga, and then it says over there, Mikdash Loyab, so we'll see again. So, but there, clear, if you look in the words of Reish Lakish, he actually just said, Loika. You just say, all you do is he says, you get Loika. All he talks about is Malchus. He doesn't mention a word about Kodesh. And therefore, And therefore, because you asked a question before regarding Korban Pesach, you had this whole question before. What about a Mitzvah who also became a Zov? Remember Mitzvah who became a Zov and he's allowed to go ahead and do and he went to the mikveh, but a Tful Yom of a Zov is like a Zov, so how can we allow it? So Ula answered, once we allow the Mitzvah, even though he's tummy, the Torah was matter, the Mitzvah, it drags along also the other thing. He said we don't need that. He said because only a lav. So the asay pushes away the lav. So the Gemara sorry, Melina Malkus, it was only again Malkus. The Gemara weiter. Ravi came along. Omar Rabavu said, you know what it's talking about? That in fact, Ravin came along and said in Bavu that the Shlok's whole din has nothing to do with what you said about bia b'mixes. It's not talking about bia b'mixes. It's talking about a tomei shenoga b'kodesh. Shlok b'chlal didn't discuss a bia b'mixes, putting your hand inside while you're tomei. Just I'm putting it inside. No, we're talking about a person who's tomei who touched a carbon, and that's what he's talking about. That you get malchus. Lina tomei shenoga b'kodesh yitma. The yitma be learned. Tomei shenoga b'kodesh. Shlok says like it, you get malchus, and Rabbi Yechon said didn't like it. Nothing to do with this whole business about what you just said before about bia b'mixes.
What's the issue?
Tummy touches a carbon.
At least it doesn't become tummy the carbon.
Someone wants to get shocked in it. Not a living one. Yeah, the Shlakish said we'll see the Gemara soon whether even before you sprinkle the blood or dafka after you sprinkle the blood. Says the Gemara. Nothing to do with bees mikdash. Reish Lakish said malkish like we say in malkish. Lakish said like how does you know like because it says in the pasuk b'chol kodesh this woman that's becoming tar after giving birth to a zachar 33 days later, and then it says in the pasuk b'chol kodesh leisiga she's not allowed to touch any kodesh, and then it says v'la migdash leisave she shouldn't walk into the base of migdash. So we compare the two, and therefore when we say that that you get malchus if you touch. So it says b'chol kodesh leisiga klar. How can you say any like it? Because who betrumik that puzzle talking about truman. How do I know? Because it says in the pasuk ad meloyis made tara. She's not allowed to touch until she completes her 33 days of tara. But if we're talking about over here carbonus, we know there's one more stage. She has to bring kapara, mechutza kapara. You're not allowed to touch. And yet it seems to me ad meloyis made tara. As soon as as soon as it comes sunset, she's allowed to. Where do we find the din that once at sunset you become tired? Only by truma. So therefore, it must be talking about truma. So nothing to do with the Reish Lakish's thing about b'chol kodesh leisiga. Now don't touch kabbanis and you get a lav. Rabbi Yechon says it's awesome, but you don't get malchus. Reish Lakish says you get malchus. Talking about Reish Lakish, haikra lahachi da'aseh. I have a question, Reish Lakish. How can you tell me b'chol kodesh leisiga is talking about pasha touching kabbanis when you yourself use this pasuk for something else, for eating kabbanis? Because there's two dinim. One is if the animal itself is tamei. You're not allowed to eat and get karas. And the other thing is if you're tummy and you eat it, and there's a lav. You yourself learn from here that that's what it's talking about. A tummy, you eat kodesh, not touching. It says the lotion of touching, but you say touching means eating. And by that, because we know that every time there's an isur, there's also has to be azhara. Yeah, ancient only came to azhara. So we know that it says it's also, but we didn't know that it's that there's azhara for it as well. The itma, and you said with this from this very pasuk, b'chol kodesh leisiga. We learned how do you know there's somebody ate if somebody is tummy and he ate kabbanis? How you know that there's an isur there? And we'll soon see how the Gemara says that leisiga means don't eat. And Rabbi Yechon Amar, Tony Bar, Rabbi Yechon says, I'll tell you how I know. Nothing, not from the word b'chol kodesh leisiga, but I know it from what Bardla said, Gzei Shava. After we learn out, to masay Gzei Shava. It says that if you eat kodesh when you're betumas haguf, and while you're tummy, it says oid tumasay boy, and it says if the animal is tummy, it says also is tuma and you get kodesh. So therefore we say. So we dash it. It says in the pasuk here, your tummy. So the punishment is a kaddish. If you're tummy and you ate a korban shlamim while you were tummy with Tumas love, you get cutters. That's the punishment. We have no azhara for it. How you know that if you're tummy not allowed to? And then it says in another pasuk that it says because boy, if he walks in the Beis Hamikdash and he has the same word boy, so we're makish it too. And just like over there by the Beis Hamikdash, there's azhara as well as an einish. So from that Gzera Shav, we learn now there's also azhara for a person who's tummy from eating kachim. That's where we learn it from. So Bada says, "Tumas must be malahal and onush v'hiza." Just like by walking in the Beis Hamikdash, you get kodesh and there's hazara. Is avkan onash v'hiza. Over here also, because it says clearly, "Lamidit l'sovish," so there's hazara as well. So over here also onash v'hiza. You get onash v'hiza. So the question is, but Reish Lakish uses this pasuk of the kodesh l'siga, use it for eating. So how can you tell me that he uses it for also touching? I'll touch a carbon and you get malchus. How can you use it for both? How does Yitaka know as well? He said that you're island both. The fact is, it says if the Torah meant only eating, why use the word loisiga? So we learn two things: say eating and say touching. And how do I know? He learns it from in this pasuk. It says b'chol kodesh leisiga ve'lamigdash leisovei. So the pasuk itself, the juxtaposition of these two dinim, tells us that leisiga is like bias hamigdash with his kares. Now, no one says you get kares for touching. If you're tummy and touch a carbon, no one says you get kares. If the pasuk compares it to migdash leisovei, it must be talking about eating. So that, from the proximity of these two ideas, clearly we're talking about eating. But the fact is that Torah says leisiga must be touching as well. So that's how we know both. How do you know eating? This gets carried the mikdash, and leisiga tells you touching, but touching you don't get kadosh, you only get a lav. So that's how we learn both. And according to this version, the Gemara has nothing to do with bi b'miktas. Tanya goes, actually in the Bible, exactly like this lakish. Leisiga does not only mean eating, but as hara, it also means touching. As hara loichel is talking about eating as well. As hara atoim as hara loichel nogea maybe means touching only. It says in Pasuk Leisiga. This is the way the Shlach learns. Bada learns Gzera Shav from another pasuk. He learns from this very pasuk. He says for that you get kodesh. So must be something similar. You get kodesh. When you get kodesh by kodesh, only if you ate it. Makat kodesh midrash. Ma mikdash dovish ben tzil shamu. There's kodesh. Av kodesh dovish ben tzil shamu. Kodesh. The even a gay. If we're talking about touching the tzil shamu, there's no kodesh there. So much we're talking about eating. But from zweitens el bachila, but from zweitens because of the sigas we also not touching. So this is the right to the shlokish. That how do you know eating from this very pasuk? So we learn two things from this pasuk. But there's another. Normally we learn it's talking about a carbon, but instead of eating it, you ate it while your tummy. A normal carbon is after zrika. So how do you know that if you ate a carbon before you did the zrika, you're also chayiv? Eat when we learned. And if you ate it before zrika, how do you know you're chayiv? You, Reish Lakish, are using the pasuk b'chol not for touching, using it for eating. But there's two kinds of eating. There's eating achas zrika and there's eating kodesh zrika. So you no longer have b'chol kodesh leisiga to tell you touching. Right, because he said, "Why is Leisiga to teach you something new?" Leisiga is teaching the new thing is Kaidem Zrika. What's the silly before or after? And Rabbi Yechon said, "In like why? Tony Badla, like Badla said, ask you Tomasa. He said only like it because he learned out from Tomasa only with his kares. There's no kares before Zrika, so therefore it's limited only to with his kares. But you say Leisiga is with his no kares, but you use Leisiga for eating Kaidem Zrika. So what's going on here? And that's Rabbi Yechon says only talking about after Zika with his Kaddish. Says the Gemara, you know how he knows? Im Kanev so lemakra b'kodesh. It should have said my bechol kodesh leziga. Bechol is telling you that I'm expanding it even further. Not only kodesh where there's no eating, where there's no Kaddish, but even furthermore leziga. Shmam and two things. Gufa, just a few more lines. Gufa, we learned Tomish Achab Sakay Mazika Rishlaki. Just this was the last thing you just said. So let's just explain it very quickly. That Rishlaki says if he ate Kaidim Zika, Rishlaki says Loika Birchan in Loika. So Omar Abaye says here we're talking about that you were tummy, and you ate it before Zika. What about in the case where the animal was tummy and you ate it before Zika? We know that if the animal was tummy and you ate the carbon after they sprinkle the blood, you chayv kares. But what about if you ate the carbon before you did the Zika? What's it in then? What happens then? All we know from this pasuk is if you're tummy and you ate the animal when it was before Zika, we include that in the lav. According to the Shlaki, you get malchus. According to it's awesome, we don't get malchus. What about if the animal was tummy? And we're normally, when we say the animal's tummy, you're not allowed to eat it, and all that is talking about after the zikah.
Is the difference between before Zrika and after, because before the kapara?
It's not a carbon yet. We learned till now. That's called the matir. When does it become chalos of a carbon? Is only after you did the matir, which is the zrika. And we have to have a special limit for kain zrika. And Rabbi in fact, doesn't use it for kain zrika. I mean, it's awesome, but he doesn't use it for kain zrika at all, because for tumasa is dafka with his chorus, which is only after zrika. So now, so have a chayta buy whatever what they would hold. So I'm gonna buy it. Machlek is the whole machlek is a davke betumas haguf. That's when Rabbi Yechon says you don't get malchus. Why? Because he learns out. That's harder from the einish. Just like the einish is only after zika, so too the azor after zika. Avol tumas basar. But if we're talking about the animal itself, if the animal itself was tamei, and then the Torah clearly says that you're not allowed to eat it and so on, then divra hakoloika. We don't use the shava, just clear the puzzle says you're not allowed to eat it. So there's no difference before zika after zika. The Amakra, what does the pasuk say? V'habasar, and this goes right. It says v'habasar, and we learned when we v'h and the. So it's a ribui. The rabbis eitzim ulavaina, the wood on the maracha, which is not edible, or the lavaina, which is not really edible, but because it's v'habasar, anything that you eat, I don't care if it's edible, not edible. The lav nechilinu. Now, what's more edible? The basar of the animal before zrika or a shtik holz? Of course, the animal before zrika. So if you're telling me the habasar to include the eitzim and the lavaina, that surely includes the animal before zrika. So what? So everyone would be made then that you're over, in lab. Yeah. However, Rava says no. Machlek is dafke betumas haguf. Ava betumas basar dibahakalim like it's aser, but everyone holds you don't get malchus. You don't get malchus for if the animal itself is tummy before zika. My timer. Even the like karina bay, we can't really call it the tumasai olav. Come again. We learn from the pasuk on nefesh ataychum sazev shlomim, and it says there the tumasai olav v'nichasa, and you can't v'nichasa because there's no kares before we think. Once there's no kares, it's not included in Israel. Like karina bay, once you cannot include in the kares, nor can you include it v'habasa shigi b'chol tamei. So what about the eitzim? Well, my habasa is eitzim lavaina. You can include eitzim. Why can't you include the basar kezika? So it says when we say eitzim is aser, after you did its matir. Remember, the matir by an animal is a zika. What's the matir by eitzim? You put it in klei sharis. Every single thing is not yet considered carbon until you complete its job. So by eitzim ulavain, even though it's not edible, but you put it in klei sharis, and then you ate it. Okay. Over here, what's the matir? When you sprinkle the blood. It's not. Anything that has a matir, it's only after you did its matir. That is its matir. And that's why by yes, la fuke behema before zrika. Stop here. Now we're not learning